You can raise your little Zoom hand. You can interrupt me. I don't really care. Or you can throw it in that chat box. Either way is a great way to get those questions asked so that I can answer them. We are covering today, we're talking about our templates in ZipForms. So I'll show you how to update existing templates and where to go to create new ones and the types of things that you may want in there. But some bonus items. When you get into your car forms library, here at the top, it says car releases forward-looking forms. And you're like, Amy, I know this. I know, but if you click the read more, it gives, it takes you over here to, is it that one or that one? Hold on, let me see. I believe it's this one here, this page. And the bonus thing here is, number one, there's all sorts of like town hall recordings and different things that will be beneficial for you to watch, especially if you're still not feeling confident with all the new changes and new forms. But there's two things down here in the middle. One is, what is a buyer's representation agreement? It's a consumer guide, and 9 reasons you need a buyer's agent. So if you're having a difficult time coming up with your value as you're communicating to clients, number one, what a buyer's rep is, and number two, what your value is or what you bring to the table. Here are those documents in addition to what is a buyer's, what that is that you can present to your summary page and a clarification of what that is. But in short, it spells out the buyer's agent responsibilities during the time they represent you, explains what your agent will do on your behalf, thereby providing more transparency in the transaction. It records exactly what and how they will be paid for their services, and ensures that you have an expert on your side as you negotiate the complex process of buying a home. And if that wasn't enough, they can scan the Q67 things a realtor does for a client, right? Talk about pulling some value out of items. The other document that I taught is 9 reasons you need a buyer's agent. Right here, another consumer guide, but you could work this into your buyer presentation to talk about the benefits of having a buyer's agent and why someone might need one. So super good consumer guide released by the California Association of Realtors. Great things that you should share and utilize in your business as we move forward with all these changes. Fine. So that was this new, in case you've never logged into car forms before, I'm sure most of you have, but in case somebody's watching this that hasn't, you go to car.org, you click on access secure transactions. Oh, here, let me go back to that page real quick. This is where I got to that one page that had all of the recordings and everything. Was this little pop-up, the new forms and business practices resources. That's where I got to, nope, none of those pages. That's where I got to the page that had all of the Q&A and everything. So here's where I got that compliance page that had all the tools and tricks and the recorded and the trainings. So that's how I got there, was clicking on that box. All right, back to that. You're going to click. Say it again.
So I can like be on my computer and watch.
Oh. All right. Let me see if I can. Nope.
I heard the call.
All right. You're going to click on Realtor Secure Transactions and then click Access Now here on ZipForms Edition. And then it's going to validate your membership. If you're not logged in, it's going to ask you to log in case you've never done this before. And then you're going to click Continue to Transactions. It's going to open up a new window. So if you have pop-up blocker on your computer, you're having problems getting in here, that could be why. We're just going to wait patiently for it to open my ZipForms. All right. So today, again, we're talking about templates. And so our template library is going to be up here on the top toolbar of our ZipForms library. It says templates right here. If you click on that, it gives you forms and checklists. We're going to click on that template library. This is where you can create new ones or delete existing ones or change existing ones, right? So with all the changes that came out with our listing agreements and our buyer's representation agreements, like you probably need to, if you have these already, you need to go in there and edit them. So if you want to delete one and just start all over, you can check the box there and hit delete. Yes, I want to delete it. You can come over here to the drop down, the little arrow. This is how you would open that template. You could get into the template details. You could change that information. So if I go edit template details, this is where I can change the name, the type of purchase, and if it's automatically applied. So if you're in a position where you've got in here and messed with several templates, sometimes what happens is when we start a new transaction, it adds multiple templates to that transaction. Okay, it could be because we listed it incorrectly in the template type. So it's attaching listing to purchase transactions, right? So who knows what. So if you don't want it automatically applied, you can say, hey, don't automatically apply this template. Otherwise, you can say, hey, automatically apply it to any new purchase, a condominium, new transactions, or apply it to all new transactions. So if you hit apply to all new transactions, it's going to apply it to whether it's a purchase or a listing or anything. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. And again, if we want to delete that, we just can come in here, select the ones, and we can start all over if we want to. Okay, if you have some in here once you set up a template, maybe you set one up for your residential single family purchase, and now you want to do a secondary template for like condos or for country properties or for vacant lots. You can, instead of starting all over, you can copy the template and then you can go in there and edit it and take and add forms in and out. So just so you know, you can do that as well. You won't have to start from scratch every time you do a template. All right, so to start a new template, we just come up here to the little new button on that top toolbar. Well, it's the middle toolbar. And it's going to say, hey, is it going to be a template for a listing, a purchase, a lease, or a lease listing? I'm going to say, hey, this is going to be a new purchase template. And it's going to ask you to name it. So I'm going to call it July 2024 single family residence buyer. Okay. And then that way I know kind of the date that I created it and then what the transaction type is. I'm going to click residential here. And then here's that auto apply button. Do you want it to auto apply to new transactions? Do we want it to, or not? The first option is do not automatically apply it. The second option is automatically apply it to new purchase residential transactions or automatically apply it to all new transactions. I'm going to say I don't want this one auto applied. Well, let's go ahead. We're going to automatically apply this template just for kicks. And then, yeah, so we're going to hit save. Okay, so now it's got this new template that it's creating. When I open it, it's going to be blank. There's not going to be anything in here. And the whole purpose of templates is that it allows us, like if I've got a new buyer, I can create a transaction in ZipForms. This template will be applied to it, and it's going to take all the documents that I want as part of a buyer transaction and put them into this file. In addition to that, any information that I input into this template, it's going to automatically input that into my new file when I create it. So I'm going to start by coming over here to all forms, the blue button in the upper right-hand side of the page. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to need a BRBC, buyer representation and broker compensation. I've got the wrong library pulled up, so give me just a second. Let's try that again. All right, there we go. Buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. I'm going to want, for all of my buyer transactions, I want a market conditions advisory or an MCA form. I want an SBSA form, a statewide buyer seller advisory. I want the wildfire disaster advisory. Oops, D. Okay. To let them know that they're in an area with wildfires and that, you know, they should look for insurance at the very beginning. I want my residential purchase agreement or the RPA.
Amy,
because I have that PRBC in addition to that, I'm probably going to bring in my SPBB form. And I probably just want that added to all of my transactions in case I need it. And then that pretty much covers kind of the basis for my buyer transaction of forms that I might want in there. Any questions so far?
I have a quick question, Amy, sorry. So I've noticed that a couple of them had like duplicates underneath. So what is that? I mean, and it's the screen isn't big enough to see, like I've done it. So like, for instance, the RPA has 2 when you see it, the BRBC has 2. Is that like, I mean, is that just like a CAR thing right now because they're transitioning? I was just
No,
like,
so what they've always had like the purchase agreement that way. And what it is one of them, they put a little dot before it. So it shows up at the top of the car forms library. And then one of them doesn't have a dot. They're the exact same form. If you hover over both of them, it says buyer representation broker compensation agreement 724. Same thing with this one. But what they've done is they've put a dot before it so that if I didn't search for any forms here, that BRBC, the California Residential Purchase Agreement, the cover sheet, and a listing agreement all appear at the very top of the library alphabetically because they have that dot in front of them.
got it. Okay, thank you.
Same forms, just has the dot. Yes, Carly, I will slow down just a little bit. I apologize. Okay, so that's that dot. It's just so if you search, it shows up there. Oh no, all right. So I've got my broker, my BRBC, MCA, and again, your guys' templates may be a little different than mine. This is what I like for my buyers. So you can decide what you want to do. They might vary just a little bit. The next step, once you add all the forms that you want to this template, is we want to go in there and I'm going to check all those boxes because I want to go in there now and edit these documents. Okay, so once I check all the boxes, I'm going to click the little box for Open in Forms Editor there at the top, kind of off color white toolbar. And it's going to open that new Forms Editor. Remember, we used to have the choice. Now there's no choice. And this one's better, I promise. It's a great Forms Editor. It just takes a little bit to get used to it. Okay, here's all my forms and documents. The nice thing about this is if I forgot to check all the boxes and I only clicked on that buyer representation agreement, like it looks like, oh, there it goes. It added I could grab additional files from the transaction. So it's just for kicks. Let's kick off this. It's loading. As soon as it is done loading, I'll kick one out. We're going to take away the seller payment to buyer's broker compensation. So now let's see, that's down here at the bottom. Oh, it disappeared again. Sometimes this has issues. Let's see if we can get it to remove. It's not going to let me take it out. But if I forgot to add it, I could just come down here and click on the 6 little dots on the left-hand side of the box there and drag it up into my transaction. Or if I think of something else that I want to add, I can come up here to the add button. And I can go to the forms library. And here I could find another form. Like maybe I want to add the cover sheet in. I can just click add. So you don't have to close out of the editor and reopen the editor in order to add additional documents. Okay, so now it's got that cover sheet in there as well. So when I'm in here in the templates, if we just scroll down, we only want to put in here information that would pertain to basically all single family residential transactions. So I would never put a buyer's name in my template because every buyer's name is going to be different. But I may want to go ahead and check these boxes on the agency disclosure so that I never have to check those boxes again. In addition, I may want to put in Realty One Group box here on the brokerage line. And I may want to put in the license number, of which I do not have it memorized. I think it's this one. But make sure you've got the right license number in there for the brokerage. The RPA dates, this would just be for templates, Kimberly, so you wouldn't want to put a date in your template because then it would, every time you'd have to go in there and put you'd have to remember to update it. So in templates, you wouldn't want to put dates. Here you'd probably want to put your information, right? So that you don't ever have to type your name again and your license number. There we go. And then once you've got that in, you just keep scrolling down, looking for the next page. So again, we wouldn't want to put a date prepared here because that's going to change with every single transaction. We wouldn't want to put a buyer's name on the first line, but the brokerage name is good. We wouldn't want to put the beginning date and the ending date on the representation period because that's going to change every time we send a new one of these out to our buyers. So we're going to leave that blank. It defaults to non-exclusive, and I want it to be exclusive because I like to make sure that I represent all my buyer clients exclusively. So I'm going to check that box, which means I will never have to check it again when I use this template. Okay. It might also, here it defaults to property type, but maybe on the location, I want to go ahead and put in all the counties that I service. So maybe it's Solano, and Yolo, and Sacramento, Napa, Sonoma, Placer, El Dorado, D-O-R-A-D-O, right? So I'm going to put in all the counties that I service there, maybe all the cities, so that every time I bring this up in this template, it's going to put it in there. Does that make sense to everybody? And your counties may be different than mine. You may be like, I only do Solano, or maybe I only represent buyers in Vacaville. You can do that too. There's no wrong or right answer there. Okay. You could, if you, oh, here's a good one. The additional buyer preference and priorities. I'm going to check that box because I forgot about the new forms, the BIP and the BFI, right? So I want those forms included. So I checked that box. So it automatically added that form to my template for me because I checked that box. Properties excluded from representation. I'm not going to put anything in there on my template because that would vary from buyer to buyer. The amount of compensation, you might have an amount that you personally choose to charge every single time. It won't let me put an X in there, and I'm not going to put a number in there because I'm not going to get in trouble. So, but you could put in that compensation there that you're going to charge every buyer, or that your desire is. Remember, it's always negotiable, but you could always fill in your template with a number there. Realty One Group Fox does not have any requirements as to what you charge a buyer. It's totally up to you. And remember, we could do an attached compensation schedule as well, or this and a flat rate, or we could check the box here and say, hey, I'm just going to charge every buyer a flat amount. You could do that as well. It's totally up to you what you decide to put in that box. Continued right for payment to broker involved properties. The continuation period should be blank calendar days after the representation period or any extension. So I'm going to put in here like a default of 90 calendar days after, right? And yours could be 60, yours might be 120. It doesn't have a limit there that's listed. It could just be 30 days, that continuation period. So whatever you feel comfortable doing, I'm going to say 45. Okay, this cancellation rates, and notice this is just if you did non-exclusive, you may want to fill in days after receipts. If you're going to do exclusive and you have that box checked, then it just defaults 30 days after receipt. Here's the BFPI form, which is another good form that just was released that I would recommend using. So I'm going to check that box. And it says, well, hey, within 5 days after the execution of this agreement, they're going to include that BF or that BPFI, but I checked the box that it's attached. So I'm going to have them fill it out at time that we do this agreement. Okay. These next two boxes, I'm not going to default check. That would be on a buyer by buyer basis. Okay. And so we'll just leave those blank. Other terms, if you had something you wanted to fill in there, you could. And that kind of takes us to the end of the grid section. There's not a whole lot else that needs to get filled in until we get to the end of this. Here at the end, we have our broker signature. So we're going to go ahead and put in our address here so that we don't ever have to type that address in again, right? Because who wants to type an address in every time? Vacaville, California, 95688. And then I'm gonna put in my telephone number there. Oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Sorry, Abby. 123. If I put in direct information, it gets us flagged when I go to post the video. Sample, and then she has to black it out. Sample email at gmail.com. There you go. Fake email. And then there. So, right, you can put your phone number and email address in there. If you're on a team, you could put in both agents' information there, or you could include the AAAA or the AAA form, right? Okay, so any questions about filling out that template for your BRBC?
I do. I have one, Amy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just had this discussion with Ed last week regarding the compensation amount, having it pre-typed in there. And he suggested that that's not a good idea because just you don't want someone coming back and saying that the price wasn't negotiated.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it kind of depends on your process of whether you send it out for electronic signatures or if you're going to have them sign it in person. And so absolutely, you could leave that blank so that there's never any question as to whether the price was negotiable. However, if you're going to send it out for electronic signatures, you do need something in there. The other thing that you could do is if you pre-printed it in there, you could still, when you go to sign it, even if it's in person, if everybody's agreeable to the number that you put in there, you could have everybody initial that box so that they all agree that this is the compensation being offered.
That's an awesome idea. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may want to have them, you know, there's the whole form that talks about like the rate of compensation is negotiable. I want to say it's a BMI form, but I could be wrong on that. No, that's the other form. It's called the BCI maybe. Anyways, we'll get there here in a minute, but you could always have them initial the paragraph there that talks about the fact that compensation is negotiable, just so that it's been explained. So even if it's printed in there, but there's a couple just different ways around that. And again, if you're going to send it out for electronic signatures, it needs to be printed in there. So it's totally up to you guys. All right. Any other questions before we move on from this form? And again, I'm not saying how I filled it out is how you should set up your template. It's going to be totally, this is just one way to do it. And you can totally tweak it or adjust it to what your needs are. All right. Buyer investigation advisory, we wouldn't put a date or an address in there because again, that's going to change. Buyers' names again are going to change. So we're going to leave that form blank. Here's that broker compensation. The BCA form is the one that I was talking about. This is where down here with the broker agreements with buyer, we may have our buyer's initial paragraph 2A stating that buyer representation compensation is fully negotiable, right? So if there's ever any concerns, you could have them initial it, showing that you went over that paragraph specifically with them. So that might be a good idea, not necessarily required by any means, but this bottom section is the section that covers your agreement with your buyers. Again, we're not going to put anything on these signature lines because of the fact that it's going to change for every transaction. Same thing with our PRBS form or possible representation. And just so you guys know, these forms are all automatically attached to that BRBC. So if you're like, Amy, you didn't add them to your template, how are they there? They're automatically attached to that BRBC. So anytime I add the buyer representation and broker compensation form over there, it automatically attaches all these forms to that document. Again, we're not going to fill in any additional information here. I'm just going to make sure your information is still correct. Same thing on the Consumer Privacy Act advisory. Nothing goes in there. And then I'm on to the market conditions advisory. Nothing will get filled in on this form. I just want it added to my template. Okay, so that's why it's here. It's not because you're like, Amy, there's nothing to fill out. That's okay. I want it every time I open up that buyer transaction. I want this document to be added. Here's that statewide buyer and seller advisory. There's nothing on this one until the last page. And then I'm just going to make sure my information is accurate on here. We're not going to fill in buyers or sellers names. Sometimes if you wanted to make it county specific, so this might be my single family residential Solano County template, right? I could check this box here and say, hey, the Solano County Regional Disclosures and Disclaimers Advisory is attached. I could do a separate one for Napa County. I could do a separate one for, Sonoma County. And then you could actually include that disclosure in your template as well. For this case, I'm just going to leave this part blank. Here's the buyers and sellers names. Then we've moved on. Now we've moved into our California residential purchase agreement template section of it, or document in that template. Again, this is going to be pre-filled out because we already did it. And now I'll never have to fill that out again on a single family residential purchase. California residential, we're not going to fill in a date. We're not going to fill in the buyer's names. We're not going to fill in the address, the city, the county, or the parcel number. So that whole top section gets a blank. Hopefully we can just pull it over in the MLS Connect when we go to write the offer. I'm going to go ahead and default on my template. I like to default check these seller and buyer boxes because for the most part, the majority of the time, I'm not representing in a dual agency fashion. Okay. Again, I can't fill out the seller's brokerage information because we don't have that yet, but my information should be filled out here. Purchase price doesn't get filled in. If you wanted to put in, you could put in like a default close of escrow. Maybe you're like, I'm going to write every offer for now on for 21 days. And then I'm going to adjust it depending on the offer. So you could fill that in or you could leave it blank. It's totally up to you. I'm going to leave the expiration alone, but again, you might say like, hey, every offer that I submit, I generally ask for like a 24 or 48-hour turnaround rather than 3 days. Initial deposit amount usually varies based on the purchase price. It'd be nice if you could fill in like 1% here and then it auto-populated there, but you can't. I usually don't use increased deposit, so I'm not going to check that box. Same thing here with the loan amount. That's going to vary from buyer to buyer. I'm going to just change this one though. I'm going to say, hey, this is going to be like 14 days for a VA or FHA on every offer, because even if it's conventional, it doesn't matter that I've changed that number. Additional amount finance, secondary financing, I'm going to leave that blank. Occupancy defaults already to primary, so we're going to leave that alone. I'm not generally going to ask for a seller credit as a general rule of thumb. That's going to vary from transaction to transaction, so I'm going to leave that one blank. But maybe for the most part now, I want to make sure that that SPBB box is checked because I'm going to use that as a way to negotiate my commission or to negotiate the buyer's portion of the commission from the buyer with the seller. Okay. Maybe I'm going to default to my down payment and closing cost of verification of that is always going to be within 24 hours of acceptance versus attached to the offer. And maybe I'm going to say, hey, most of my buyers are pre-approved. Somebody have a question? No? All right. I'm just hearing things. On my final verification of property condition, I always change that to 1 to 5 days. So by putting it in my template, I don't have to change it anymore. So now I changed it from the 5th day prior to the close of escrow is when I have to do my verification of property condition to, hey, I can do it anytime in that window from 1 to 5 days prior to close of escrow. You may want to tighten up contingencies. Maybe you're like, hey, I always start with like 14. There's no reason to have 17. That's a weird number. So I'm just going to go through and update all of these with 14. So that shows up on my template. And remember, just because it's on your template, when you go to open this in your file and create a new file, you can always go in there and change this. It just prevents you from having to do it every time you open up a file. That's the goal here, is to try to make your life a little easier. Time of possession, it's upon notice of recordation, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Close the escrow. Seller delivery of documents, I like to always have that tightened up to about 3 or 5 days, generally speaking. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. Sign and return escrow holder provisions, I'm going to put 3 days there. I'm going to put, hey, you've got 1 day if it's got an HOA to pay that HOA fee. And I want those smoke alarms and water heater bracing and carbon monoxide. I want those installed in 2 days. because I always want to make sure that they're there before the appraisal happens. And if I've got a 14-day appraisal contingency, chances are it's going to happen before that 7th day. And if they've got 7 days to do it, we might have to come back out for a reinspection, which could delay the entire close of escrow. Okay, so I like to tighten those up. That doesn't mean, again, that you have to. Those could all just be left at the default. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I'm going to come in here and check stove. I'm going to check dishwasher, and I'm going to check microwave, because most properties that I make offers on have a stove, a dishwasher, and a microwave, and those should be included. It automatically checks bathroom mirrors for us. If you're like, Amy, I don't understand why stove isn't checked in the first place. Amy, why is that even on there? Here's the reason for the stove, the dishwasher, and like built-in microwaves is that technically, like a dishwasher and a stove, they're not attached to a wall. They're not a fixture in the property. They could just be pulled out, unplugged, and the sellers could take them with them, right? Like a freestanding range or a dishwasher or potentially a microwave. Now, most microwaves anymore, especially on newer homes, they are actually attached to the cabinet. They're installed in that cabinet. And oftentimes they're hardwired in there. But so most of the time a microwave would be a fixture. However, I'm always going to check the box here as long as there's a microwave in the house so that the stove, the dishwasher, and the microwave are always included. I don't ever want to miss that because I would hate to have the close of escrow come along and me forgot to check the stove box and the seller to be really funny and sell that stove before the close of escrow. I would be really sad. So I check those boxes. Okay. No additional items that I would automatically include or exclude there, so I don't fill anything else out. For my natural hazard zone disclosure, I always ask the seller to pay for it. I always include the environmental report, and for the most part, you could put in if you've got a favorite company that you want, or if you generally just let the seller choose. You could put seller to choose provider. Right? So you could either put in your default provider or your default phrase there, whatever you like to do. It's totally up to you. Optional wildfire disclosure. For the most part, I don't request that. So I'm just going to leave that one blank. Just know that if it says click here for additional report or click here to select wildfire service provider, if we don't click there and put anything, it's going to fill those out as blank when we go to send it out for signatures. It's not going to send it out with the click here for additional report in that line. Okay. If there's additional reports you always ask for, we could fill those in here on Q3. Q4 addresses smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heater bracing. Who's going to pay for that? My default is asking the seller to take care of that. I also asked the seller to cover any government required point of sale inspections or reports. So I'm going to check that box there. I'm going to leave the next section blank, and who pays for the corrective or remedial actions. I'm going to leave that open. The escrow fee, if you want to go ahead and check that box there, if you have your favorite escrow provider, you could fill it in there. Provider, right? If you're like, man, I normally service Solano County where it's customary for the buyer to pay for title and escrow fees, you could go ahead and default that. Or if you were setting this up as your Solano County purchase agreement, right? You can always go in there and change it. Let's see what else. We've got county transfer tax. For the most part, in just about every county around us, it's customary for the seller to pay for that. So I'm going to check that box there. And then I'm not going to check anything for the city transfer tax because most of my business is in Solano County where we don't have that unless you're in Vallejo. I'm also not going to select anything here for the HOA because I only want to select that if there is actually an HOA associated with the property. And again, you could set up a separate template for that. Private transfer fees, default to seller. I'm going to leave that alone. Q16 and 17 is additional fees and costs. I'm going to leave that blank. I don't normally fill something in there. Q18, if you normally ask the seller to pay for the home warranty or the buyer usually pays for it, or maybe you always buy the home warranty for your buyer, you could fill that in here. So you could automatically check that. If it varies from transaction to transaction, then you could change that up. I'm going to just select one so that it falls in there as my default is asking the seller to pay $600 towards the home warranty. And then if you had other terms that you normally put in there, you could fill that in on R. Okay, any questions about that grid? Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be filled out exactly like this. This is just how we would set up. How do you want to set up your template? Okay, if you always include additional addendums, addendas, right? Buyer and seller advisories. Like I always include the wildfire disaster advisory, so I'm going to check that. I always include my statewide buyer and seller advisory, so I'm going to check that box because those are always things that I include. Okay, the other thing is I may always say, hey, I always include the market conditions advisory. Market conditions. Right? That would go in that line. You don't have to fill those in. You could just leave those blank. You can still include them even if the box isn't checked. Okay. Then we just continue on. There's nothing to fill in there until we get to the last page or second to last page. All right. Again, buyer's information is not going to get automatically filled in. The seller's information and response isn't going to get automatically filled in. Down here, your information should be ready to go, already in there and filled out. Designated electronic delivery addresses is defaulted to the email above. So make sure that is the email that you want people sending stuff to. Okay. Escrow holder, nothing gets filled in there, and that takes us to the end of that purchase agreement. Then we have the buyer's investigation advisory again. Again, we're not going to put in a property address or buyer's names. Again, we have that PRBS. So a lot of those same forms that we see and they signed with our BRBC are also being signed at time of purchase with the residential purchase agreement. We want to make sure your information's filled out on these forms where it's applicable. That will just prevent you from having to do it in the future. Wire fraud, nothing gets filled in. There's your California consumer privacy. Here's your wildfire disaster advisory. Again, we're not really filling out anything here. We just want it to be in that form so that when I create a new transaction. Here's our seller's payment for buyer's broker compensation. We're not going to fill in a date, a property address. We're not going to fill in the buyers and sellers names. It's already got our brokerage information in there, so we don't have to fill that in again. We probably aren't going to default and ask the seller to pay for everything because it's going to vary from transaction to transaction if we're even going to use this form and what we would put in there. So there's not a whole lot that goes in the template on that form. And here's the cover sheet. That's that one I just added afterwards. It's going to automatically pull the information from your offer to this cover sheet. So we're just going to leave that alone. See, it's auto-populated any of the information I've already inputted, and it would continue to do so. This is that buyer identification of preferences and priorities that I mentioned as part of the BRBC. I'm going to default this to number 1 because I know that the first one is always going to be number 1. We're not going to put buyers' names. We're not going to put the dates that it begins and ends. I'm not going to fill out any of these red things. That's what the buyer fills out. My information's at the bottom. So that's all that I would do for that form, the BIPP, buyer identification of preferences and priorities. And I'm also going to use the buyer financial and personal information form. Again, most of this isn't going to get filled out as part of the template, just where it asks for like the broker's name and my information at the bottom. Everything else gets filled out at time that they sign that BRBC form. Okay, so once I have all the forms completed to my liking for my template, I'm just going to come up here for peace of mind. I'm going to click the save button. And then I'm going to click the back button. Okay, that takes us back to our ZipForms library here. Going to close out of that editing software. I'm just going to wait for it to reopen. Here it's taken us back to the transaction template with all the forms in there. So these are all the forms that we added and had been, we edited through that editing program. Okay, so now if I go back to list, oh, it took me back. So I'm going to hit templates again, forms and checklists. It took me back to the transaction list for some reason. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to just edit my other ones so it doesn't add them on there. So give me just a second. I'm going to go into template details for these 3. In fact, I probably should just delete them, but that's all right. We're going to say do not automatically apply. Just because I want to show you how this all works. We're going to hit template details. I'm just turning off all my other templates so that I don't end up with multiple templates overlapping each other. All right, and then we're just going to verify that I did set this one up correctly to automatically apply. I don't think I did. All right, so we're going to automatically apply this template to any purchase, residential, new transactions. Okay. Oh, that wasn't the one I just, hold on. I think I just did the wrong one again. It rearranged them. How rude. All right. This is the one I just created. I'm going to make sure that one's set to auto apply. All right, save. All right, so now if I go back to my transaction dashboard, so the only time you're going to go into templates is when we're editing the actual template. We're editing the information that we want to show up on that form every time we pull that template in, okay? I've had some instances in the past where people have gone into templates to create the transactions, and you don't want to do that, okay? For our transactions, when we go, we've got a new buyer that we met that's ready to go see properties. We're going to have them sign that BRBC form. I'm in here in transactions. I'm going to click new transaction. I'm going to hit new purchase or offer because it's a new buyer. It's going to open up this window and we're going to say test purchase. I'm not going to put in an address yet because I just met this buyer. We're just going to go see some properties. We don't even have an address yet, but I am going to click the box for residential. Active, and see now it said down here which templates are going to be automatically applied by the admin. The July 2024 single family residence buyer transaction is going to be applied. Okay, automatically puts that on there. I'm going to hit save, and then it's going to open that transaction for me that I just created. It's going to auto apply that template for me. Okay, now I'm going to go in here. What I would normally do when I open up a transaction, I'll show you what those forms look like here in a minute, but I'm going to go to parties here on the gray toolbar. I'm going to say, we're going to add buyer 1. We're going to call them buyer 1. That's their first name and last name, and their email is buyer1@test.com. Okay, I want their name in there. And if they're already pre-approved, I want their name in here to match their name on the pre-approval letter. Okay. It should be their legal name. Usually the lender knows their legal name, and that's what's on that pre-approval letter. And then I want their email in here because when I go to send something out for signatures, that email is going to be key. Okay. And if I put it in here under contacts or parties, then I don't have to input it ever again. So now I have buyer 1 in there, and we're going to add, just for kicks, we're going to add buyer 2. Buyer 2 and buyer 2@test.com. Oops.com. I'm going to save that one. All right, then the next tab I'm going to go to on the gray line, now that I have the parties to the transaction added, is that documents section here. So gray toolbar, I'm going to click the documents tab. And then magically, all of the documents that were in that template should magically appear here in my transaction. Sometimes I have issues with them not being in here, and if you close out of the transaction and reopen it, they magically appear. But see, all the things that I had set up in the template for a single family residence magically appear in this file. I don't have to go in there and find them and add them. And not only that, but if I click on the BRBC form to open it up in the editor, all that information that I went ahead and put in that template is going to magically appear here as well, so that I don't have to re-input that information. So we're going to give it just a second. So see, on the first page here, it already has all of my, all of my information on here. It already has the buyer's boxes checked. And because I inputted the parties, it's already put the buyer's names in here as well. Okay, so the template's going to pull over all the details. So if I scroll to that BRBC, see how it's already got the exclusive box checked. It's already got the counties I service entered in here. It's got the continued right for payment inputted already. If I go down to the last page, so all that information that was in the template is already added in here. Okay, does everybody see how that works? Yeah, we're good. We got the buyer's investigation advisory attached, the broker compensation, right? Okay, so now if you're like, that's great, Amy, but I made an error in my template. How do I fix it? Okay, so this was just how to set up a new transaction with that template attached. We're going to come back to our ZipForms main page. So I'm going to get out of that editor by hitting the back button. If I need to make changes to that template, I'm just going to come back in here to the templates tab once it opens up this transaction. I'm going to click forms and checklists. Oops, hold on. I'm ahead of my computer. Let's try that again. All right, so now I'm in templates. Here's that template again. All I have to do is click on it. It's going to open that template back up, and I can go in there and edit any of the documents. I can add them. I can add documents. I can take documents out. I can make changes to that template. It's being rude and it's not showing me the document. So I'm just going to scoot over to checklist, and then I'm going to go back to documents. I could have been impatient too. So hold on. All right, let's go back to checklist. It should add those pages back in. And keep in mind while we're waiting for that to load, it states, I don't know why there's nothing appearing. We'll close out and close back, reopen it. But notice it says here, if you're currently modifying, you are currently modifying a purchase template, click here if you want to create a new purchase transaction. So it's trying to prevent you from overwriting your template with information you don't want on there. Back to list. Hold on, I'm going to reopen that again because it's being weird and not opening my documents. There we go. So I just closed out and reopened it to get the documents. And then if I wanted to edit one, I could just click on it. Now, Claudia asked a question about what forms would I include in my listing templates. Let's see what's in this one. Let's see how accurate this one is. So if I was creating a listing template, I would want that residential listing agreement, okay, your RLA form. I like the disclosure information advisory, the DIA form. I always include the market conditions advisory or the MCA form along with my SBSA, the statewide buyer and seller advisory. I also include the water conserving plumbing fixtures and carbon monoxide detector notice, the WCMD, and the water heater and smoke detector statement of compliance, the WHSD. Don't get me started on how I think those forms are structured incorrectly, but we'll tackle that another day. And then I include the square footage and lot size advisory, the SFLS. Okay, the other form that I would probably want to include that's not on this one would be the SELM form, the SELM. The seller instructions to exclude listing from the multiple listing service. The new MLSA form should already be attached to the residential listing agreement. So let's just double check that it's in there. I don't think I've actually opened the new listing form since it was added to the car forms library. So the new listing agreement, just, you know, has that agency disclosure, which should always be first. Then you've got your listing agreement. I'm really excited that they rearranged the order of all of these so that all the bonus forms are at the end. Brings me joy and happiness. It'd bring me even more joy and more happiness if I could arrange them myself. Here's that multiple listing service addendum automatically attached to that listing agreement. So we've got the agency disclosure, the residential listing agreement, the multiple listing service addendum, which is the MLSA. You've got your seller's advisory or your SA form that's automatically attached. You get your broker's compensation advisory or the BCA form. We just saw that with the residential purchase agreement. You got your PRBS or your possible representation of more than one buyer or seller disclosure and consent. You have your fair housing discrimination advisory. So many forms. Your California Consumer Privacy Act advisory disclosure and notice. So those are all automatically attached to that listing agreement. So if you're wondering why, so let's go back to that template. If you're wondering why I would not include forms such as the AVID form, your agent visual inspection disclosure, which has to be done on every buyer and seller transaction. For the listing transaction, I don't include the seller property questionnaire, the SPQ, or the TDS, the transfer disclosure statement, because those forms I always send out through Glide. Same thing with like a lead-based paint hazard disclosure for properties built before 1978, and the earthquake hazards questionnaire for those properties built before 1965. All of those have questions that sellers have to complete, so I send those through Glide. So I don't worry about adding those to my transaction file inside of my car forms library. So I try to include any forms that I use on every transaction, like every listing transaction, all those forms that would need to be included, but not the ones that I send out through another program. Is that helpful to everybody? Ralph, question?
No questions.
Okay. Perfect. And then on my listing template, I would go in there, click all the boxes, go to edit, and do the same thing that I did with my buyer template. I would go in there and fill in all the information that I wanted to magically appear on every document with every listing. So like sellers' names aren't going to go on there, property addresses aren't going to go on there, dates aren't going to go on there, and things that are negotiable aren't going to go on there. So, but all the blanket stuff, that just save me a little bit of time when I go in there to draw up a listing agreement, or when I'm going in there to draw up a buyer's file or a residential purchase agreement or a BRBC form. So there's templates. There's how you get in to edit your templates. There's how you make changes to your templates and how you create them, and then how they automatically apply. Now, if I, it's going to take me back to transactions. Hold on. Now notice here in my templates, I'll show you one more bonus item here in just a minute. If I go to that listing one I was just in and hit edit the template details, this one, see, its template type is a listing for residential, and I may want to automatically apply this template to listing residential new transactions. So this would only get applied if it was a new listing versus a new purchasing. So that keeps it so those templates get applied to only where they belong, whether it's a buyer transaction or a seller transaction, by clicking up here. The other thing that you can do in here, bonus content for today, is clauses. So over here on the off-white toolbar at the top on the far left-hand side of the page, if I click on clauses, is my library of personal clauses that I have created. If you're like, Amy, what in the world? So, on the like residential purchase agreement at the end of the grid, there's other terms. So maybe I have something that I want to put in other terms on a regular basis, or a phrase that I use all the time. Like on my listing, paperwork, my residential listing agreement, I usually will pay for photos and inspections unless the listing doesn't sell for any reason, and then I want the seller to pay for that. So here I would click on this. Here's that forms clause here that I've previously saved. Agent to credit seller cost of professional photos and any pre-listing inspections at close of escrow. Right? So hey, seller, I'm going to ask you to pay for it up front. At close of escrow, I'm going to credit those back to you. So I have that saved as a clause, so I don't have to remember the verbiage for it. And then when I go to do my listing agreement, if I'm going to do that, I can automatically add that clause in. So some other clauses that I do is like public marketing. I don't even know what this one is. Property to be marketed to the public beginning on. Right? So I might use that clause on like a modification of terms or a listing agreement or the MLSA form. Here's the prorated refund on my ZIP form. Seller would only pay for days actually in possession, days not used. We refunded the seller upon delivery of possession. I don't know if you guys knew this, but on the ZIP form, the default is that if I said, hey, I want a 30-day rent back or 29-day rent back on the ZIP form, even if I only use 10 days of that 29 days, the buyers get to keep the whole amount of rent that I agreed to pay for that period. So I like to get a prorated refund for my seller. So I've got that clause saved in case I need to add it to the ZIP form, in case they're like, I think we're only going to need 10 days, but let's ask for 14, right? Or on every listing, which is on my template already, but I put that if the property's not going to go on, well, I don't set this on my template, but I have it saved as a clause to add, because if the listing's not going to go on the market right away, like we're talking like I'm signing a listing agreement today for something that's going to go on the market in a month, I always put a clause on there next to the list price that just says under additional terms, list price to be reviewed within 10 days of on market date. And I have that clause saved. I'll show you how it works. To create a new clause, we can just hit the new clause button, and then it pops up. What kind of category is it? Is it a purchase or a forms 2.0 clause? I don't know the difference. All of mine show up as forms 2.0, just for the record. You're going to name it, and then you'd put in the text. And you're going to hit save. Okay, and how that works on your forms is, let's go to transactions. I'm going to go to the test purchase that I just created earlier when I showed you how to apply that template. I'm going to go into documents. We're going to wait patiently for all the documents to magically appear and hope that they magically appear. All right, hold on. We're going to click on checklist and then come back to documents. I don't normally have this problem. I think it has something to do with when I'm streaming to Zoom, that it just takes a while for them to load up. Maybe. All right, hold on. We're going to go back to list. Let's reopen it again. Sorry, guys, for the delay. All right. We're just going to work our way across to make sure it loads those documents up. All right, we've got our buyers in there. I think it just deleted them again. All right. Let's see if it loads. Oh, good. All right. So now let's go into that BRBC form. I'm just going to click on it. If you just click on one form, it's going to open up that editor versus if you check all the boxes. If you check the boxes, it'll open the editor with all the forms that boxes are checked. I know that's different from the previous one. So if you don't have much experience with the new editor, that's how it works. So here is that disclosure regarding agency relationships. We're just going to scroll down here to a place that, so this one has like a fill in. Hold on. It's not gonna, usually it'll let me, oh, here. So we can go clause. So if I've clicked this box and then I go into my personal clauses and then I say appraisal, oh, it's not gonna let me edit. Okay, hold on. I have to find a line item that'll let me put in a clause. Oh, maybe they took them all out of the new forms. That's sad. All right, hold on. Normally, when you have like a blank fill-in line, it'll have a little button up there that says with a little plus sign and a clause to add a clause. And then you can add your clauses in there or create a new one if you want it to save. But let's try finding an old form. I'm sad that the clause form is vanished.
Are you in the template screen still, or are you in like a new transaction?
I'm in a new transaction.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what. Oh, let's try. Hold on. I clicked all forms. Let's open the California Residential Purchase Agreement. All right, we're just going to scroll down a little ways. No, it took my add a clause buttons away. So sad. All right, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time in clauses unless they magically come back. That's got the drop down. Yeah, normally it would pop up with like a add a clause button. Like I've got my escrow holder saved as a clause. So it seems like maybe they're phasing the clauses out. But that's sad. Maybe they'll add them back in at some point. Oh, there, look, other terms, this one has add a clause. So see, they've taken it out of some of the fields, but for the other terms, you can hit add clause. And then I could come up here to my saved clauses and pick the one that I wanted. Oh, let's see. But we'll just use that one. The first American home warranty value plus with fridge, right? So specifying which home warranty I wanted. I had that here so that I could add the clause here, but it won't let me do that oh, maybe it's here. So some of the lines still let you do it. So like my home warranty that I like to pick with the options that I want is in there. So I have that saved as a clause. And that way I don't have to type it in every time. I can just put it in there. If I wanted to create an existing clause, so that would be add an existing clause, I could come over here. Let's see, we're going to go personal. It's not there. So I could go create a clause over here. If I'm like, oh, I want something in there all the time, I can title it and do it, and then it will save it to my clause library by doing it in that section under clauses. Otherwise, when I go to select here, I just have to choose from the ones that are already created. Okay. Any questions about that clauses or templates or how they get used or utilized? Slide, how to edit them. All right. Well, fabulous. Claudia, do you have a question?
I was just gonna say so because I'm playing with it too. I'm like, I guess you could just copy and paste it in those areas that doesn't have it, but that's still silly. But because you can still see it on the right-hand side. But yeah, that's a little annoying. But thank you.
Yeah, you can copy and paste it into those lines. Absolutely. If you have trainings that you would like to see show up on the fall calendar in the chat box, there's a link for a spreadsheet to go make recommendations on trainings that you would like to see. We're working on that calendar now. We are finishing up. This calendar finishes up at the end of the month, and then we'll have a new calendar coming out at the beginning of September. So look forward to that. We will not have any trainings the week of Labor Day. So that first week of September. But other than that, we will start our fall training series there in September. Make some suggestions so I know what to put on the calendar that you guys want to see. And thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Amy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.